Hi, and welcome back to another episode of TubaPeopleTV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all of the time. I'm here in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, Canada. Did I get that right, Greg?
You did. You're here.
This is Greg Irvine, Dr. Gregory Irvine. Greg is the Associate Professor of Brass at University of Prince Edward Island and a former student of Arnold Jacobs. Greg and I were in school at Northwestern together. You were getting your master's,
Yeah.
and I was finishing up my.
You were in your master's as well.
I was also
Same
getting my
year.
master's. That's right. Okay. It was very fun.
Mm-hmm.
We had a great time.
We had a great time. Yeah.
Greg is former principal tubist of the Hamilton Philharmonic in Ontario, and is currently, as well as his position at UPEI, is the tubist for the Symphony Nova Scotia, the Symphony New Brunswick, and the Prince Edward Island Symphony Orchestra. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you.
Greg, I'm wondering if you can tell me anything about your time with Mr. Jacobs, studying with Mr. Jacobs. Anything we could talk about big picture, talk about small picture. What were some headlines or a headline or two that was interesting for you?
Well, I started actually studying with him before we were doing our masters.
Mm-hmm.
The first lessons I had were in the fall of 1976. The first time I traveled from Toronto, I was a student at the University of Toronto, and at that time I had been in the National Youth Orchestra, and I had studied with Dick Erb there, who was of course a student of Arnold Jacobs,
Mm-hmm.
and so a friend and I traveled down, and we heard the orchestra, which was amazing.
Do you remember what was on that concert?
I do. It was Giulini conducting an all Brahms program. The first Brahms piano concerto with Daniel Barenboim as the soloist, and the first symphony.
Very good.
And it was awesome, in the true sense of the word. It was awesome. And I remember just, sitting there and realizing that my jaw was on the floor a couple of times, and just completely dumbstruck by the sound and the beauty of it. And of course, Mr. Jacobs wasn't involved in that concert, but in any case, I had my lesson the day after, and of course, at that time. I had my big problem was that I was very stopped up and was not moving much air. Going through the motions of moving lots of air, but not moving lots.
A lot
of
of shape change, but not much airflow.
Exactly, and it was all right there, and very small. Everything was very small, and I wasn't using thick air, and of course that was the thing that Mr. Jacobs went right to work on, was trying to get me opened up and to actually move some air, take more in and move more and allow it to get through, to get the lips to vibrate, because they were just they were starved.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the immediate problem. There was also an issue. The influences that I'd had listening in, like brass chamber music and so on, the style was not a really sustained style, and I had a tendency to articulate very harshly or hard and then die away. Mm-hmm. So we worked on that as well. Those are the two main things. And of course, that was every time I couldn't stay for long, so I'd have these
short lesson, and then you'd have to leave.
And come back another time. So there was always, that was, ongoing, working on that for some time. And even by the time I went to, nearly 10 years later, 8 years later, to do the masters, I still was suffering from that. That's kind of just not moving as much air as freely as I needed to.
Yeah.
And I think there was, I think you could tell that there was some musical potential there.
Yeah.
But it was just the physical things that were getting in the way. So I wasn't able to express myself as well, musically as I certainly can now, or wanted to at the time. It was just frustrating. So
Just because of the, you didn't have an opportunity to have sustained weekly lessons over a period of time.
right.
So you got the information early on, but it was just being able to apply that on your own at home.
Well, and also I was studying with Chuck Dallenbach at the time.
Oh yeah.
And of course at U of T, and Chuck was a student of Mr. Jacobs, and so, you know, he was reinforcing it all the time. But I was a tough nut to crack, and so between them, they worked on me hard. But I was, I just at that age, we're all in a hurry, and we're trying to do more than we perhaps should be, and trying to slow things down and just get the basics happening, and there's the ego thing. When at that age, you think, I can do that, the same thing, and so you don't allow yourself to let the message take kind of hold that it can and needs to. You just you got to show the world what you can do.
Do you remember any sort of an aha moment with Jake, or maybe in your practicing after a lesson, or even after a lesson with Chuck Dallenbach, something, where?
Well, it's so long ago now it's hard to remember. But what I do recall is that after a period of time of being away from it, the messages were so strong and reinforced so many times that on my own, when I had time to, and I didn't have a lot of repertoire to prepare and things like that. So after I got out of school, and I was able to, I had some time. I was playing in an orchestra, but I had some time to work on my own. Things started to make more sense, and you get to distill it down, and
time to ponder.
Yeah, and try things and experiment, and
not under the gun of repertoire for recitals.
And so I think that I realized, the aha moments came after, in many ways, and they continued to come.
Yes.
After I continued to go back and study with him over the next 10 years, and then when I did my doctorate at Northwestern, so after the masters, there were aha moments, the same kind of thing, the reinforcement in 84, 85. That's when I did the masters, when we were there. And then I went back and did the doctorate and worked with Rex Martin, and it just all kept, getting stronger.
Yeah.
And hearing it different ways, thinking of it in different ways, and of course, having Dick at the NYO and the National Youth Orchestra, and having becoming friends with Vince Chickowitz and talking with him, about these things, tone production and so on, and so I got it from many different people, as well as the same message through different lenses, and it all just it got stronger as time went on, over a period of time, and I was still having I still have aha moments. It's
true. Yeah.
You never solve it all, and
it's ongoing.
and then when I started doing the research for my dissertation on his teaching, and reading it, and reading other people's experiences, and that's another kind of a way to learn, the reading and digesting, and that just all helps solidify it. So, it's just been ongoing.
So you mentioned that you had at NYO, you had interaction with Vince Chickowitz. And I know Mr. Chickowitz had a regular appearance at the NYO in Canada annually.
Yeah, he, I'm trying to remember when it was he would have started there. It was late 70s, early 80s. And I had been in the youth orchestra in 1976, the summer of 1976 and the summer of 1977. And then returned after that to do a chamber music program and a brass quintet through the NYO. And then it was probably around 1980 that Vince started coming. And of course, well, just a wonderful person, you know, and we became good friends. And I had so much to learn still, you know, at that stage of the game. And so I just, we used to, before dinner, on most days, there was a kind of a free time. I was there, I went back after I was in this chamber music program throughout the 1980s to work at the National Youth Orchestra. So when I was, you know, we had a limited season in Hamilton that didn't go through the summer. We had no summer season, so that freed me up to go to the NYO, and I went and worked as a counselor, worked as a stage manager, did a variety of different jobs over the years, and we had a bit of free time before dinner each day, and we just used to get together, and perhaps some other brass players, and listen to music, and have a beer, and talk, you know.
Sounds fun.
Oh, it was great. It was a
great times.
Great time, yeah. A great part of my education, you know. I learned a lot in those times. And of course, Dick Erb was still there too, teaching. So, and I saw him. I would still participate, you know, whenever it was possible. Even though I wasn't a student, I'd play, you know, when I could for him and so on. And so through both of them, I just learned a lot. But you know, it was interesting talking to Vince because, of course, he knew Jake not just as a student but as a colleague, and so they spent a lot of time on the road together and you know, backstage together. And they, of course, Vince had perhaps more so than many of Mr. Jacobs' colleagues, a real interest in teaching. And so they used to talk about it all the time, you know.
Yeah.
And Vince's approach to teaching was modeled, you know, after what he and Jacobs talked about and what he heard in the orchestra, you know, and between sitting next to Herseth and hearing Jacobs, you know, on the bottom.
Yeah.
I mean, it just so a lot of really, really practical stuff and very, very helpful ways of thinking about playing and music, and he had some of his own things, you know, that I learned that were very helpful, became very helpful in my own teaching, things like wind patterns, you know, and using the wind in style without actually playing a note, you know, and creating that, you know, getting that sense of how the thing goes and how the wind, using the wind relates to that, you know, the blowing relates to that for articulation and accents and crescendos and all that kind of stuff, you know. So that was one, and he was really also very much into buzz aids and using the, you know, so that transition from buzzing the mouthpiece, which, you know, and then that psychological reminder the moment the horn goes on the end of the mouthpiece of what you used to do, and how the buzz aid could be a real bridge between those two states, you know, and really bridge the gap, so that you did copy, you did do exactly what you did on the mouthpiece when you had the buzz aid in, and you take that out to play the instrument, and it worked, you know. It was really
it's very helpful.
So things like that, you know, there are just add-ons kind of thing, a little bit different, as I said, a different lens again, you know, for the same kinds of things.
Sound very productive.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if I ever actually took a lesson from Vince, but
you studied.
I studied with him. And listening to music and talking about style, different orchestras, and you know, that kind of thing.
I remember taking his orchestral styles class. It was very interesting. It's less these days. There's not as much differences in the styles of certainly the brass sections.
Right.
Of orchestras around the country. And to a certain extent around the globe. There's more of a universal
right.
sound approach.
Yeah.
It's not totally.
Yeah,
But
No.
it's closer now than it used to be, at least.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. I remember, in that class we listened to different orchestras playing the music of composers from that country. Like hearing a Tchaikovsky symphony played by a Russian orchestra as opposed to being played by an American orchestra, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. How interesting that was, and I've done the same thing since. It's great nowadays with YouTube. You can see any orchestra from anywhere in the world on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so I had my students listening to, say, a trombone student listening to Bolero with a French, player, French orchestra, a Spanish orchestra, an American orchestra, all over the place.
That's a great
tool. Really interesting to get, and then to listen. It was such a great listening experience to discern the nuances, in the style of playing.
Definitely.
So very, very. But that course was great. That it really made you listen. You had to, and of course we had to put them on record players with vinyl.
They were big.
It's not as easy as it is nowadays. That's
They're about
sure.
this big.
Yeah. Exactly.
Now, Greg, you're the professor of brass here at UPEI. It's a smaller department, and so they don't have a person for each instrument. They have a brass specialist.
Right.
What's that? It's been my observation that in other similar departments around the continent, if there's one person that's going to be the brass specialist, it's usually a high brass player.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like for you being a low brass player and yet teaching not only the low brass but the middle and high brass?
Well, I think it's an advantage. Now, of course, I say that not ever having been a high brass player, but in my, I see it as an advantage, especially having studied with Mr. Jacobs, because, as you know, he had students of all instruments, trumpet, horn, as well as, trombone, tuba, euphonium, come to him for lessons. Mm-hmm. And he was very successful, and I think, and that was something that one of the reasons that I wanted to go back and do a doctorate was so that I could actually study his approach and look at, and what I did in that was I observed teachers of other instruments like the trumpet, horn, trombone, and
so you studied Vince's teaching?
Yeah.
You studied Chris O'Foley's teaching on trombone
and Gail Williams.
And
I was very fortunate. Each of them allowed me to take my old-fashioned video camera in and set it up.
It's also very large.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, not like today. And I set it up, and I would turn it on and leave. Uh-huh. And I had at least 8 hours of them teaching lessons with different teachers or with the different students.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the same student that they were teaching. Yeah. So I got to see their teaching of individuals, maybe 6 to 8 individuals in their studios. And so I got to see, and what I was looking for in particular was the influence, Jacob's influence in their teaching and how they applied it as, to their own instrument and from their own perspective of what they got from Jacobs. And of course I also observed Rex Martin, and that was very interesting too, because of course he's not the same person as Arnold Jacobs, but teaching the same instrument, plays the same instrument, and so on, teaching euphonium players and tuba players. So that was really interesting, and of course he has a different background, having studied with Ed Livingston, and there's the whole, background with Bill Bell there, that lineage coming through as well, so that was very interesting as well. But being a teacher here, having to teach all the brass instruments, I was very interested in finding out how the information that these people got, like Vince Chikowitz, Gail Williams, Frank Christofoli, what they distilled from Jacob's teaching into their own teaching and used it with their students. And so that when I came back to teach here, I would have a better understanding of those particular perspectives, of a trumpet teacher, trumpet player teaching the trumpet.
Do you recall any practical applications when you came back to the job? When you started teaching again, you came off your sabbatical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And is there any difference or changes, or just a better understanding?
I think a better understanding, because of course, all of them were on the same message. It's all about music, and that you don't dwell on the mechanics. It's song and wind, and they all taught that way, really,
Mm-hmm.
and not getting into this muscle does this and you have to do this to do that and all that stuff, Now they also, of course, would bring their own experiences with other teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that was really interesting because then I could see the materials they might use for a trumpet player or a horn player, specific to that instrument, and apply Jacob's approach using that material.
Yeah.
Which was really handy, and also the repertoire for those instruments. I got to see them teaching some of that repertoire that I was not so familiar with, and how they dealt with the issues that those pieces bring to the fore, for a particular student.
Do you get any pushback from high, horn or trumpet players because you're a tuba player and
No.
things are so grossly different in terms of size?
Right. Yeah. No. I think that earlier on when I was not teaching here, even before I was teaching here, and I remember I'd studied with Jacobs, I'd studied with Chuck, I'd studied with Dick Erb. I talked to Vince, and there was a trumpet player who was complaining, a student at the NYO, who was complaining about, just having too much air, and I said to him, well, it only feels like you've got too much air when you're trying to hold it in. If the air pressure inside is greater than the air pressure outside.
So just let it out.
Yeah, so you don't hold it in. You just
Waste
have
it.
to, and don't, of course, what he was doing was he was, blocking it off, the
Mhm.
Valsalva thing. And so that makes you feel like your head's going to explode.
Right.
Whether you're playing the trumpet or the tuba or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you just take the breath and don't hold it in with your throat,
Yeah.
but just equalize the air pressure inside with that without,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not comfortable at all. It's just and so you just don't want to restrict. You just want to, no matter what the instrument, And of course, when you're a trumpet player or horn player, you can play longer phrases.
This is true.
When you take a full breath.
With a better sound.
Yeah, and with a better sound, because you're not trying to squeeze it out. You're not, at the bottom end of that volume range of capacity, and so you're not below. You're always working on the plus side, and it's easy then. The danger for anybody is when you take that full breath is to go or
right.
To hold it in and create more pressure inside than there is outside. And if you just I always liked Mr. Jacobs' thing, take a breath, hold it in by closing your throat, and then count out loud.
Right. 1,
Yeah.
2,
Right.
3.
And if you go 1, 2, 3, well, there's the sound you're going to get on your instrument.
Yeah.
You know, and if you just take it in, 1, 2, 3, and you know, and that's I remember Dick Erb saying, you know, that's a very useful thing. You know, you get people saying, well, don't take a deep breath and hold it in. Well, it's a great tool if you're not closing off for, like, if you don't know what the conductor's going to do next.
Yeah, right.
And you've got your air and you're ready to go, you know, bang, you're right on.
Yeah.
You know? Or if you're waiting for somebody else to start the group and you take your breath ahead of time, they breathe in time and you just go.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
So it's a really helpful practical
tank.
tool.
Yeah.
Too. You can just go. You know, you don't have to worry about getting a breath with somebody else or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're not stopped up. You know. Not
Very good.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, Greg, you're in the process of finishing up a book, and it's a book that's based upon your dissertation for
Right.
your DMA at Northwestern.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just briefly describe what that's about?
Yeah, it's this book. There has been, of course, since you and I studied with Mr. Jacobs in the 1980s, there have been a number of authors write about his work and his teaching and his playing. And my interest, being our school here is largely a music education program. And I teach brass techniques to music education majors, and not all of them are brass players.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are not brass players. They're woodwind players and so on.
Yeah.
And, you know, I got me to thinking, well, these people, they get a course in brass techniques in which I give them, you know, the whole load of hay, pretty much, on different instruments. But, you know, it's not an easy thing to process, and I just wonder about maybe students in other programs who don't have the same pedigree that I have, or the background and the same advantages that I had, you know, and my students get because of my studies with Jacobs and his proteges and so on. And I just wanted to put, if you will, translate his approach into language, and that, you know, a typical junior high, intermediate school, senior high teacher who might be a woodwind player, for example, or maybe a brass player from a different background, mm-hmm. could understand, you know, the simple approach of song and wind.
Yeah.
And so that's really what I wanted to do. So that's basically what the book is about. And I've had some feedback from other people who've read it, who suggested it would be nice to include the part from my dissertation and expand on that part about other people's experiences with Jacobs,
yeah.
and how he influenced them, and how it's you know, carried them through in their own lives as professional players and teachers and so on. So that's the other kind of component of the book.
Well,
so
can't wait for it to be published. I'm reading through it now,
mm-hmm.
Just to help the proofing and such. And it's very interesting. It's a great read.
You.
So
yeah, thank you.
Hopefully a smart publisher will come along and.
Yeah, I got it into one
Snap
right now, and hopefully that'll bear fruit. You know, just have to wait and see. But,
well, speaking of fruit, Puddles is always, you know, he's with me all the time on these trips. And I hope he hasn't been a burden to you.
No,
here,
you know,
in your home.
He seems to understand what's going on very well.
Yeah, he's a little self-centered, but he thinks you're number one. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Even though that's a 0. Oh, that's an O. Right. Okay.
But if you're a regular follower of TubaPeopleTV segments, or you know that Puddles is always after me to be a good guest, and so knowing of your background, we thought that you might enjoy these genuine University of Oregon smoked duck nuts as a thank you for your time in this interview.
Obviously a delicacy.
Yes.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. I can share those with my wife, can I? She's
Absolutely.
Well, thanks very much, Puddles. Thanks, Mike.
He says you're welcome. As do I.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
Keep
Glad
your
you're
stick
here.
on the ice.
Yeah, stay out of trees.
All right. Don't take any wooden nickels.
Right. And I won't say the other one.
All right. Back to you.